Welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life podcast. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thanks for tuning in today's show. This podcast is dedicated to individuals and professionals who desire to learn more about the subject of health and wellness, as well as alternative technologies to better health and vitality. Let's get started. Hello, welcome to the Bob Priest Show of Life. I'm your host, Bob Priest. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. Our guest on this episode is Terry Tucker. Welcome, Terry.
Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about Terry before we turn this over to Terry and let him tell us about his story a little bit. Terry is a motivational speaker, author, international podcast guest on the topics of motivation, mindset, and self-development. He has a business administration degree from the Citadel, where he played NCAA Division I college basketball, and a master's degree from Boston University. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about some of the other things he's done in his life, but that's a mouthful right there, Terry. That's a lot of life already.
It is. I've been very fortunate. I've taken advantage of some things, and I've had people around me that have kind of steered me in the right direction. So I feel very fortunate for the life that I've had.
Well, that's awesome. So, I've read your bio, and I've talked to you, and I've talked to some friends of mine that have met you, and you have a really interesting journey in life. And so I'd like for our audience to listen to your journey and who you were and who you've become over the years, and some of the challenges that you faced.
Sure. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall. And as you mentioned, I went to the Citadel, and I went on a basketball scholarship. And when I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, Bob, but this was long before the internet was available, to help people find employment. And I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. So, I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. And I look back now and realize how little I knew about business just because I had a degree. Fortunately, I was able to find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. That was the good news. The bad news was, that I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out at Wendy's, then became a hospital administrator, then made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT Team Hostage Negotiator. After law enforcement, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball, became an author in 2020, but for the last 11 years, I've been battling this rare form of cancer. And and then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Well, that's interesting because my pastor's son is in that new department of the Space Force. And he's out in, I think it's Colorado right now is where they're located.
Yes.
And
yes.
he's actually out there, and he's finished up his basics and stuff, and he's working there. And so that's an exciting development that's happened in our country, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, she's having to deal with the growing pains of starting a new branch of the military, but is working with some great people, and it's certainly getting great opportunities with them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I've heard the same thing from my pastor and what his son shares with him.
Yeah.
So I tell you, your resume is pretty interesting because you go from executive to administrator to a SWAT negotiator to coaching a girls basketball team. You're kind of like my career's been. It's like I really want to try all these different things, and there's always a value that comes out of the different places we go, isn't there?
There really is. And, if you look at my resume, it almost looks like a Super Bowl went off in a room, and it's just bouncing all over the place. But there is a backstory to it. And So my grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954 and was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. And let's face it, trauma medicine in 1933 when he was shot was a whole lot different than trauma medicine in 2023. But when I expressed an interest in following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's what my dad wanted me to do. That's not what I felt my purpose in life was. So as I mentioned, when I graduated from the Citadel, I had a choice. It could have been, well, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go blaze my own trail and do my own thing. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, my resume makes a little bit more sense now. I did what my father did. I went into business. My first two jobs were kind of white collar jobs. And then I sort of joke. I did what every good son did. I waited till my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams. And I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most accounts is pretty old to be getting into that line of work. I do know, Bob, that I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy than my younger counterparts. So
I'm sure going through the basic part of it was a little bit different.
It was. It absolutely was.
That's crazy. So you've had all these wonderful successes in the early stages of your career. And then unfortunately, there was a turn. And you now are battling through this strange form of cancer. Talk to us a little bit about how you've navigated that challenge, because your attitude is so positive and so upbeat. And we're doing a Zoom right now, so I get to see Terry's face, and he's just as positive and big old grin on his face, and just love his attitude. So how do you maintain that when you know you're going through all this?
I think it goes back to what I learned from team sports. And for me, it was sports. I think it can be whatever team you're on. I mean, you've been involved in music and band and things like that. I think it could be that team or your family or whatever it ends up being. But one of the things I learned from playing basketball, and I started when I was 9 years old and played all the way up until I graduated from the Citadel when I was 21. And what team sports taught me was the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, your parents down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And so don't get me wrong. I mean, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I have bad days. I cry, I get down, I feel sorry for myself. But when I do, I find that I'm looking inward, that it's about me. And I find a real easy way to get out of that is to go find somebody else to help or to talk to or whatever it is. And I'm treated every 3 weeks at the hospital for an entire week. So I have plenty of people that I can reach out to and say, hey, how you doing? Or do you want to have a cup of coffee or do you want to just talk? And now all of a sudden your focus is not on you and how bad things are for you. Your focus is on trying to make a difference in somebody else's life. And that's just been, when I got cancer, I made the decision early on that I was never going to take out my misfortune on my family, on a doctor, on a nurse, on a therapist, on somebody that was trying to help me. It wasn't their fault that I got cancer. I got it. And so I'm going to have to deal with it. But I've seen so many people that are just, they're scared, they're angry, they have anxiety. And so they project that on doctors, on nurses and things like that. And I understand why they do it. There's fear, there's emotion involved in that. But it's like, no, it's not their fault. It's not their problem. So I just try to be a little more positive because those people, one, are trying to help me, and all these other people that I'm at the University of Colorado hospitals, and our infusion center is 40 plus bays. So there's a lot of people getting a lot of treatment that these people are trying to make a difference in their life. So I'm not going to try to make their life any more difficult than it already is.
Well, that's a great attitude to have, and that's a really good point that our listeners can take home with them. And no matter what we're going through, we wake up and it's raining outside, and some people just look at that as being an awful day. And I look at it as being, well, my flowers needed watering today and I don't have to do it, or something like that. So it's just all in how we spin and look at things. And that's a great point. So, what are some of the challenges, the top challenges that you think people, because you're going through some of this, whether it's through your cancer or through some other things you've dealt with in your lifetime, what are some of the top challenges that you see that people are dealing with that maybe you could point a little light out to it and help them to think through that?
I think the biggest issue, I have what I call my four truths. And I really think that those kind of encapsulate some of the things that I've had to face, that I've had to deal with. And I've kind of learned from those things. And I'll give them to you. I have them on a Post-it note here in my office, so I see them multiple times during the day, and they constantly get reinforced. And the first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life, and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one is, I guess I look at more as a legacy type of truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I call those truths sort of the bedrock of my soul. I think they're just a good place to start to try to build a quality life off of. So those are all things, and people used to ask me, which one's more important? And I used to say they're all equally important. But the more I read, the more I learn, the more I kind of delve into this. I really think the first one about controlling your mind, it is the most important, because if you can't control your mind, then everything else really gets out of control incredibly quickly. When you have pain in your life, you need to control your mind, because if you don't, it's going to control you. You need to get on top of that pain as opposed to letting that pain get on top of you.
Right. That brings to mind, have you ever heard of the name Chuck Swindoll?
Yes.
Yes. There's a quote that he always had out that had 90% of how we think is what controls the 10% of what we do. And a lot of times it gets reversed. We let that 10% totally control everything. And so it really is a control of your mind and how we process and think through whatever we're going through, whether it's positive, negative, good, bad, whatever. I always, as a teacher, I always was talking about leaving behind a legacy in the band room. Because, you have kids come through as a 8th grader and they graduate as a senior. And so what do you do in those 4 years you're there? And what do you leave behind for the next group of kids to come through from year to year? And that's how you build quality programs. I'm sure as a basketball player, that's exactly how your coaches thought. So, and of course, the last one's always the best one is don't quit. Regardless of what we're going through, we don't quit. When it's over, but we don't quit until it is. Those are really great truths.
I think so. And I, that last one about, it's interesting. I've seen so many people in my life that, start down a road toward a goal, and then they butt up against an impediment. Something gets in their way and they can't get over it, around it, through it. So they quit. But they just don't quit. Now they got to blame somebody. They've got to blame their parents or their boss or their station in life. Very few people take personal responsibility for their own success and happiness. And when I got cancer, people were like, well, who do you blame? Like, what do you mean, who do I blame? It's like, well, you must blame somebody. Like, no, I don't blame anybody because I got cancer. And then when people find out I have a faith life, they're like, well, you must blame God. And I used to joke with them. I'm like, no, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning, checked his to-do list and said, Terry Tucker cancer today. I don't believe that at all. But I do believe, I know for a fact that he's given me the strength to get through some incredibly ugly, dark, and difficult times in my life. So I'm like, I don't blame him. I'm just glad he's there, to help me get through this stuff, because you and I were talking about your health issues before we jumped on. I don't think I could have, I wouldn't be here 11 years later with this cancer fight if it hadn't been for the many times that he kind of jumped in and saved me.
I agree. I mean, I do believe we have to number one, our spiritual life has to be in check. And of course, we're talking to a big, large group of people. So everybody looks at spirituality in different ways, but mine is God and Jesus Christ. And so and I believe yours is too, based on listening to your podcast and our conversations. This morning while I was in the gym, I always listen to a book or podcast or something while I'm working out. And there's this book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Have you read that one?
I have not, no.
And it's interesting that you just mentioned what you did, because that's exactly the chapter I was listening to.
Really?
Exactly. And, and I remembered back especially in my younger career, when things didn't go my way, I blamed somebody. Whether it was I blamed the kids because we didn't win the contest, or I blamed the administration because whatever. I blamed my parents because I wasn't brought up with a certain mindset. Whatever the blame was, it was the blame. And never once looked in the mirror and go, "Oh, Bob, guess what? You're in control." Like your first thing you said, you're in control of the mind. So I totally agree with you. So I'm really excited. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm going to. I wanted to hear a little bit about your book, Sustainable Excellence, because it sounds like in your career, your life, that sustainable part's been a big, big word for you.
It has. And people always ask me, how did you come to write this book? And initially I didn't. There's that old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me. I've never had the opportunity to have the creator of the universe, have a conversation with me one-on-one. But I think what God does is puts people in our path that make the same suggestion. And people were like, "You should write a book. You should write a book." And I was like, I am not an author. I shouldn't write a book. But then more and more people suggested it. And I think I'm smart enough when a number of people do suggest something that I at least need to kind of buck up and listen a little bit. It's like, maybe I had to focus on this. And, I always say, I wrote the book, but it was certainly inspired by something much bigger than me. And the book was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado with her fiance, where my wife and I live. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is?" I said, "I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason." So that was the first conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me who was in college on social media and said, "What do you think are the most important things I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life?" And Bob, I didn't want to give him that, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him that. And not that those aren't important. Those really are important. But I wanted to see if I could go deeper. So I spent some time taking some notes and eventually kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally in 2020, I had my leg amputated because of my cancer. I sat down at the computer during that 3 to 4 month period where I was healing. So I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and the real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how Sustainable Excellence came to be.
That is an awesome story. And how can our readers receive your book if they would like to look into that?
Yeah, it's available anywhere you can get a book online, Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, Apple iBooks, anywhere you can get a book. You just Google sustainable excellence and Terry Tucker, or excellence and Tucker, or whatever, and you know it'll probably pop up.
That's awesome. I tell you, I am just impressed with your overall approach to life, Terry. And so the question, do you have another book in the making?
You know, I'm toying with a book. Sustainable Excellence is a book about success and how to be successful in life. And I think success is what we do for us. It's something, that we are. The second book, if I write it, if I get to that point, I want to be about another word that begins with S, and that is significance. Success is what we do for us. Significance is what we do for other people. And I think you can be both. I think you can be successful and significant, but I think I'd like that second book to be more about how we can make a difference in other people's lives, as well as making a difference in our own life.
Do you believe that people put too much emphasis on the word success, meaning money, rather than things like helping others, reaching out, finding different purposes?
I do, and I've had a lot of time when you're in therapy and treatment and stuff like that. You have a lot of time to sit around and sort of be in your own head. And I'm no different. I mean, I think there was a point in my life where I wanted to sort of have it all, however you define that. And I think that's sort of the problem right now, that we seem to think that we're born empty, and that once we get out of school and we kind of get into life, that our job is sort of to fill ourselves up. We want to get a great education. We want to have a good job, make a lot of money, have a good family, be educated, all this stuff. And we fill ourselves up, and that's going to make us happy. And Bob, what I've come to understand, or at least in my life, is that it's just the opposite. Right. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful, however you define that word, in our lives, already inside of us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it to our benefit. So our job shouldn't be to fill ourselves out. Our job, being born full, should be to empty ourselves out for the betterment of certainly, ourselves, our family, our society, our community, our God, whatever you believe. And I look at the people, and my wife is in the financial services industry, and is friends with a lot of shakers and movers, a lot of people that you and I would say, my gosh, that guy has more money than God, and those people never seem to be happy. Yeah. And I think the people that are happy realize that life isn't about what you get. It's about what you give. Yeah. I just lost my best friend of 55 years a couple of months ago, just a fluke aneurysm. And the thing that when I went to his memorial service and I spoke at it, one of the things that I wrote, I had wanted to write him a letter back way before this happened, and I just couldn't come up with the right words. And so my title ended up being A Tall Oak, because I saw him throughout my 55 years, and I'm a little younger than him, so I was kind of always his little shadow. But we just became such great friends, and he treated me with such respect. But he was a godly man. He was a virtuous man. He was an honest man. He was a family man. He loved his children. He loved his children and his wife just to the nth degree. And so I talked about him and his life and the life he led. But the thing the underlying theme for everybody that was there was well over 600 people at his funeral. He had asked his wife just shortly before he died, he just said, I don't feel like I have done enough for God. I don't feel like I have fulfilled enough. Yet this man was going out and doing all the things that the principles we read in our Bible. He was helping the widows. He was building things that were falling apart. He was cleaning houses. He was doing these physical labor things that he could do because he loved that. And he was always a soft-spoken, he listened, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the end of his life, when I thought about him and I was having to say goodbye to him that day, and as hard as that was, the joyous part was that his vessel, his body, was used up in a very proper way. And he ended his life filling other people's lives.
And that's the way that when I started thinking more about my purpose, that's the way I want to go, and is to find as many ways as I can find to empty my vessel, me, and helping others. And that sounds very much like what Terry's been doing as well.
Yeah, I think when you realize that, I think when the light bulb goes on and you realize that it's not about what I can get, having stuff, having things. I remember I had a nurse recently ask me what it was like to have my foot amputated. I had my foot amputated in 2018 and my leg in 2020. And I told her it hasn't been easy learning to walk, and I'm usually in a wheelchair. Because let's face it, at 6'8", learning to walk again and falling, it's not a good thing.
No.
But what I told her was, cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my heart, it can't touch my mind, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Bob. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a lot of time, going to the gym, eating right, getting enough rest, reducing stress, all the things that we know how to be impactful for our bodies. And I'm not telling you not to do that. I think you absolutely should do that. But what I am suggesting is maybe spending a little more time each day working on who we really are, our heart, our mind, and our soul. Because as you said, this vessel, this house, this body, it's going to go away. It's going to decay. It's going to be gone. But what's eternal is that heart, mind, and soul. And so spend a little time every day trying to develop that, to make it better, to make you, who you really are, a better human being.
Amen to that. So Terry, it's been an enjoyable conversation with you, and I could keep you on here for another hour, but I'm not going to do that. I always like to ask my guests to leave 2 points for our listeners to take and use in their life, if possible, if they choose to do so. So what are 2 points or 2 thoughts that you would like to share with our audience as we get ready to leave today?
I guess let me leave you, 2 quotes that have been very impactful in my life. The first one, I was a big fan of John Wooden, who was the basketball coach at UCLA when I was growing up, and read everything he did, read everything, listened to interviews and things like that. And he had a definition of success that I have never been able to find a better one. And it's this: success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing that you did the best to become the best that you're capable of becoming. So here's this great coach. If you listen to that definition, it doesn't say anything about winning, doesn't say anything about what you get. It just says, did I do the best I could? Did I use my mental, emotional, physical faculties to become great, and however you define that. So that's always been an impactful one for me. And then the second one is from Ernest Hemingway, who said, "Life breaks everyone, and afterwards, many are stronger at the broken places." We all know, you break your arm and it sets and it heals. A lot of times that break is stronger than that bone was before you broke it. And I think about that in life. We're all going to face hard times in life. We're all going to face difficulties in life. But can you use that difficulty to make you stronger? I remember the quote from I'm going to give you another quote. I didn't plan on this, but this is kind of part of it. Another quote from Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, who said, "I never lose. I either learn or I win." And if you keep that in mind, I think so many people today are caught up in, they look at people, successful businessmen, doctors, entertainers, athletes, whatever it is, and they say, boy, that person's successful. Boy, that's great. I want to be like that person. But what they don't see is that the road to success is paved with failure. And I think about my own daughter who went to the Air Force Academy to play basketball. Yeah, she was able to do that because of all the days in the summer when she was in the hot, sweaty, humid gymnasium, putting up thousands and thousands and thousands of shots. Nobody ever saw that. They saw, in the uniform on the court playing the games. But the road to success is paved with failure. Don't be afraid to fail.
The phrase I always heard was, "Success is failure turned inside out."
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I remember reading a story about Michael Jordan back when he was in high school that he didn't make it on the team, and he sat on the bench handing out towels and passing out water to the teammates just to be around the heat, so to speak. And I understand you've played against him. Is that true?
I did. My senior year at the Citadel, I was very lucky. They used to play a tournament in the Charlotte Coliseum called the North-South Doubleheader, and they took two teams from North Carolina, which just happened to be North Carolina and North Carolina State, and two teams from South Carolina, which happened to be the Citadel and Furman, and we would play a round robin. So Friday night, 1982, Michael Jordan's freshman year at North Carolina, we got to play against them. They would go on and win the national championship that year. And then the next night, we played against Jim Valvano and the North Carolina State team, who the following year, 1983, they would be the national champion. So in the course of one weekend, I got to play against two national championship teams. And kind of a quick funny story, fast forward about 20 years, my youngest brother is the basketball coach at Loyola Academy in Chicago. Jordan is playing for the Chicago Bulls in the NBA, and my brother is coaching his two sons. And he said, one day we're at practice, and it's toward the end of practice, and I'm teaching the players a drill, and I look up, and nobody's paying attention to anything I'm saying. So I look where the players are looking, and it was over at the door of the gym to come into the gym. And Jordan had come in to the gym as a dad to pick up his kids and bring them home, after school, after practice. And my brother looked at him and said, "Hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind stepping out in the hall until practice is over?" And Jordan and his wife were incredibly gracious. He's like, "Sure, coach, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'll wait outside till practice is over." My brother thought later, "Gee, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice." So
yeah, he had to rethink that one, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you seen the movie that's out that is talking about Jordan and his experience of becoming a partner with Nike?
Yes, I have. My wife and I watched that a couple of weeks ago.
My wife and I just watched it last week. I found that extremely fascinating, and how that all came about, and the Air Jordan, and how his mother was such a support factor for him. You really learn a lot about the backstory, as we call it, about the really great people that seem to have their house in order, no matter how big they become success-wise and all that. So it's kind of interesting. But Terry, this has been a really fun interview. I appreciate the opportunity to have this time with you. For our listeners, this is the end of our episode with the Bob Priest Show of Life. I hope that you enjoy this episode with Terry Tucker. I will leave notes and information about Terry for you to look him up and to find his books and all that kind of stuff. You guys have a great day. Look forward to talking to you next week. And this is Bob signing off. Hey everyone, thanks again for checking into today's episode. If you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, Apple, leave me a 5-star rating if you so choose. And if you enjoyed the show, I'm so grateful that you're spending some time with us and listening to our podcast. If you need to get in touch with me to learn more about my passion to inform and educate about alternative methods and modalities of healing, you can go to www.bobpriest.life. That's BOBPRIEST.life. While there, check out a blog or two and listen to other podcast sessions that I've had in the past. Guys, have a great day, and thank you so much for joining in.